Well, let's say now a little bit of economics. That's always there when we speak about the big topics and the big problems. First of all, I would like to thank our distinguished participants in this panel. We already met before Monsieur Auxerre, and he will be joined now by Mr. Karim El Ainoui, is Executive President of the Policy Center for the New South in Rabat, and he's also the Dean of the Faculty of Economics and Social Sciences and Executive Vice President of the Mohammed VI Polytechnic University. He was also active at the Central Bank of Morocco and the World Bank. Also in this panel, and not for the first time in a MEM panel, so welcome back, is also Giampiero Massolo. He is president of Fincantieri and also president of the Italian Institute for International Policy Studies, ISPI. He's a career diplomat. Ambassador Massolo was, among other tasks, the coordinator of the Italian intelligence community and the Italian Prime Minister personal representative for the G8 and the G20 summits. He's also a professor in the field of national security and foreign relations at different institutions. And just when we speak about national security, I would go with the first question to Giampiero Massolo. As we heard before from Mr. Auxerre, okay, the economy is doing well, maybe even fine after the shock, but the security situation is not improving. So what does this mean for a region that is very close to Europe, and Europe should be a stabilizing factor? What should be the role of Europe in this security situation in the Mediterranean? Please, Mr. Massolo.
Well, Fred, thank you very much for having invited me also this year to this very important meeting, and congratulations for your work and for your debates. Well, insecurity, actually, Admiral Auxerre is quite right. It's not improving at all. I would say quite the contrary. And the risk that we are running here is sort of a, from one side, creating something like a black hole in which all the initiatives sink one after the other. And the second risk is actually to live in a context of missed opportunities. We live in a transition that is, we are witnessing sort of a global reshaping of the strategic situation. We are living, as Ian Bremmer would say, in a T0 world. And this, if we apply this to the Mediterranean, we see that we witness a continuous phase of retrenchment by the United States. The United States increasingly seem to want to rely on, of a balance of power in the region that would be autonomous, not led by the United States. And quite on the contrary, we still don't have a security, a broader security framework in replacement of the old situation in which actually, to a certain extent, the United States represented sort of a reference power. This creates two kinds of phenomena. One phenomenon is that the balancing role should be assumed by European Union, but European Union is as divided as ever, I would say. It's a collection of national positions, much more than a firmly established and articulated European position. On the other side, the power vacuum that the American retrenchment and the European failure to be there to replace it promptly creates is actually sort of the living room for new powers, especially, well, new world powers, because I'm speaking, of course, about Turkey and Russia. It's hard to say that those powers are new, but certainly the space that they enjoy is the capacity of maneuver that they enjoy nowadays, and they the way in which they manage to use their military power, their intelligence power, their diplomacies, which is much more easier than European countries in Western countries as such, certainly gives to them a lot of room of maneuver. So we have Turkey that is increasingly leading a policy of hegemony, siding with the political Islam, and trying to exploit all the voids. Already what they achieved in Libya in the more general destruction of the West is pretty remarkable. They are there to stay, and we will be obliged to take this into account. On the other side, Russia is traditionally seeking warm seas and a sort of debouché towards the Mediterranean Sea, and they are near to accomplish this. What we should do, on one side, since I am not very optimistic about the possibility for Europe to develop all in a sudden organized foreign and security policy, I think that the main European countries should join effort, should coordinate better. One of telling examples of this is the much better relation between Italy and France nowadays as far as Libya and the Eastern Mediterranean is concerned. This is a remarkable progress, I would say, and stress, and this is a way in which main European countries should proceed. On the other side, I think that there is still room, and this is maybe also a little bit more closer to the subject of the panel. I think that no matter to a certain extent what governments do, I think that there is a huge room for enterprises, for companies to perform in order to create links that at the end of the day, the governments could not consider and not be able to build on those kind of links that the enterprises and the civil societies, basing and starting from common interests, would have developed. This is a major opportunity and a major chance. I think that we should, as enterprises, as companies, as you told, I also chair one, which is Fincantier. We are shipbuilders. This is a very important occasion for the private sector and for the companies to make their voice being heard very loudly.
Okay, thank you for this analysis. If I may ask the technician if it is possible to improve the quality of the sound, because I do have some difficulty to understand. I don't know what's about the public. So maybe for them it's even worse, so if we can make maybe another attempt to connect. I would go on with Mr. El Ainoui, also starting from this security situation that is not improving or is even getting worse. I mean, what does this mean for the economic of the Mediterranean area? And because we are speaking also about ports, what does that mean for infrastructure? Because infrastructure, that's long-term investments. So what's the long-term view on economic and on investment in the infrastructures, according to you? Please, Mr. El Ainoui.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks to particularly Professor Gilles Kepel, who has invited me to the organizers. I'm not a security specialist, but what I can tell you is that it is a public good and it is a shared good. So it is the common interest of the countries of the Mediterranean to have a secure and stable environment. And this is, unfortunately, I guess it has deteriorated, as I can see and assess it, although I'm not a specialist again, over the past 10 years, I would say, particularly what's happening in Libya, but also multiple foreign interventions, and a deeper connection with the Sahel region as well, which is more and more sort of connected to the Mediterranean. But again, I don't think it is a fundamental impediment to investment in infrastructure in the Med. If I compare with the rest of the world, I think there is a pretty acceptable environment for cross-border investments, and they are happening in many countries. If I take Morocco as an example, if you take on average over the past, let's say 15 years, 20 years, we receive close to 3 percentage points of GDP in net foreign direct investment over those 15 years. So, and a big chunk of this goes to infrastructure as well. Morocco itself has heavily invested in network infrastructure. What I would say could be improved in the region, and it's particularly on energy. I think we're, doing quite well on ports in the Med and this part of the Mediterranean region. But I see many opportunities, particularly in connecting ourselves in energy and namely green energy and solar and wind power that could travel on both sides of the Mediterranean. There could be improvement in the way, in the business climate, in procedures on ports and customs, etc. Although we've made lots of progress, since most of the countries in this region, particularly the occidental side of the Mediterranean, have free trade agreement with the European Union. So there a very strong and steady convergence of norms and processes and institution has happened over the past, let's say, it's a long process that has started so many years ago. So I would say this is one leverage, one lever which is very important to stimulate investment in infrastructure, which are by essence in the long run, is finance. There, I think we could do better in terms of building the institutions to provide long-term finance with the right incentives and the trust building that goes with it, and the underwriting mechanisms that could be built together. There are existing institutions such as the European Investment Bank, in particular, which can play a fundamental role in funding this long-term investment and building this trust and underwriting mechanisms. So this is what I would say at this point.
Mr. El-Ainoui, you spoke about this long-term infrastructure needing to be financed, and before we heard about, let's call them new kids in the block like Russia, Turkey, but also China. And China is already coming in many countries with the Belt and Road Initiative, providing money to build ports and other infrastructures. How do you feel? What do you think about the influence that China is taking in the Mediterranean area, also for financing?
Well, this is the trust and the underwriting mechanism I mentioned about. They have internalized all that, basically, through the public sector and the role of the public sector. Providing guarantees, providing the framework, providing the finance, and sort of providing an insurance mechanisms for firms that are often public enterprises. So it gives you an idea of the importance of this kind of mechanism where the market doesn't necessarily provide them, where we have market failures and it's not necessarily naturally happening, where you need state interventions, where you have very complex coordination mechanism to make this happen. The example of Tangier Med in Morocco is a very good example of beyond the technicalities of the port, of the capacity of public policies to put together very complex pieces and interaction with foreign investors. I think it's new for a country like Morocco to be able to provide, to sort of deliver concretely on a very complex chain of actors and interventions, etc., to deliver such a project. So yes, China is a competitor, of course, is a large, and they have, I would say, understood that, and they've found a solution. I think there's a space for a more market-based oriented solution with finance. The problem is with finance, that is as sort of reluctant to commit in the long run. And we don't have necessarily, specialized fund here. There are a few of those. I think not enough, and of course in close coordination with governments that provide the trust and the underwriting sort of mechanism without getting into subsidies and white elephants. So it's a complex balancing act. I'm a bit surprised that this discussion is not sort of intensively happening between this side, both sides of the Mediterranean. It happens on specific projects with bilateral countries, but not as a sort of strategic orientation with all the stakeholders and the actors working together.
Mr. Massolo, we just spoke about China and financing infrastructure, but what's the impact on security and on politics of this coming in of China in the Mediterranean? Mr. Massolo, could you give an assessment of this from your point of view?
Well, take Montenegro. We had a plan of cooperation between Montenegro and China, building a major infrastructure for the country. And now Montenegro finds itself trapped and heavily dependent on China, because actually China de facto owns the country that is unable to repay its debt. And this is, it's not a secret, everybody knows. And I think that from this point of view, people, governments and countries are becoming a little bit more aware and a bit more careful. Of course, it is difficult to resist. As has been stated in the previous intervention, it is complex and difficult to resist and to make appropriate decision in the case by case and individual basis. This is why I was complaining the lack of a more global security framework, which would be a Western framework, as it has been the case until today, which does not mean, of course, that you don't have to deal with China, that you don't have to partner to a certain extent. But my point is that you have to do it in being aware and without being left alone. From this point of view, I think, as my predecessor in intervention was saying, that we would need a broader regional platform dealing with among the two shores of the Mediterranean, not on a case-by-case base, but a little bit more in an organic way. Actually, what we will need in the coming years, 5 to 10 years, we all know that the International Monetary Fund actually estimates that we will need an intervention in infrastructures and investment in infrastructures of $10 billion in a period of 5 to 10 years, which means 7% of the GDP, of the global and total GDP. And of course, this can't be dealt with on a case-by-case basis. How to mobilize? First and foremost, as I was saying, I am convinced that closer cooperation between the main European countries and between the main European countries and the countries of the southern shore of the Mediterranean would be a very desirable thing. So international cooperation. trying to stimulate international organizations, competent, relevant international organizations to boost the elaboration of common rules and transparency. Once again, we should not leave to China the monopoly of the rule-making in terms of how investments are regulated. They are very skillful in operating in multilateral rule-setting organizations. We should be more careful. And third, we should try to mobilize investment banks and to promote public-private initiatives on a much more active base than until present.
Thank you. And on this point, I would like to introduce one of the participants of the MEM that is sitting with us here on this panel. That's Ms. Perlman, that has a question that is related to this topic. Please, Ms. Perlman.
Thank you, and also thank you for the opportunity to be here on behalf of fellow young changemakers, and thank you to the speakers for your in-depth answers. So I think we can all agree that in today's reality, many considerations that are not purely economic are affecting the decision-making that in the end is supposed to affect the economic growth of the region. And I'd like to take another example of Europe. We're here in Europe today, and we're seeing that what maximizes the economy is the borderless transportation of goods. And this is a very optimistic future to look at, but again, we're young change makers and we're looking at the future. I'd like to ask, what would it take to bring the region to such a place by removing the geopolitical constraints and enabling the economic development that is not just by the political decision-making process that I described earlier?
Thank you for the question. Who wants to take it up? Maybe Monsieur Serre, would you like to answer to the question by Ms. Perlman?
Yes, I'm not an expert in economy or neither in business, but this question of the free trade area was already raised in the 90s in the Barcelona summit, and 2010 was the target date to create this free trade area between the two shores of the Mediterranean. And it didn't work. Why? Because it was a nonsense to isolate economic from the other aspects, and the two other speakers of this panel have already underlined it. My point is that the key, in my view, one of the key elements is the absence of Europe. We have a strategic vacuum in this region from the United States, which is now filled by other actors, which are not, I would say, peacemaker, they are defending their interests, their geopolitical interests, often in confrontation with the interest of Europe, but not only, as well other countries in this region. So there is clearly a need to fill this vacuum, and Europe has a role to play. And Europe is not a player because northern countries are completely looking out elsewhere, either in Asia, either in East, towards the East. And the southern countries of Europe are in competition, Mr. Massolo was saying. So Italy, France, but as well Spain, Greece must try to speak with one voice. It was, the Med7 initiative tried to help it to create this single voice focused on the Med and to have a global vision, economic, politics, security, cultural, and so on vision. But clearly, until now, it did not obtain the result we hoped. So there is a place. There is a place for the EU. More than a place, there is a responsibility from European country of the EU, Mediterranean country of the EU, to try to take the lead of this new framework which has to be built. And my second point is that, and I end there, this framework must take into account all the aspects of the situation, security, political, and long-term aspect, not only the economical aspect. Because if it's not the case, we will go to the same failures that we have done during the 90s.
Thank you. What does it satisfy your question on this one? Or is there's also Mr. Elainawi, you also want to say something on this one, or about the integration?
We trade a lot, yeah, I mean, there's much more trade between North-South than within the South. So most of the countries are quite open and have a very high share of imports over GDP. But in the end, it's difficult to extract yourself from geopolitical realities. So, but depending on the country, it's very specific. I think if you have to look country by country. But I think I would not be too pessimistic on trade, because we have so many free trade agreements. Of course, Europe and the Med, but also within the Med. If you take the Agadir Accord agreement, I mean, the spaghetti balls of free trade agreement. Improvements could be made in services, I would say. And this is also on the table and has been for quite a long time with job. But I would come back to what was said. I mean, we need a broader vision of objectives and why we're doing things, and the broad dimensions of this partnership. That has to take into account many dimensions, and I think maybe it's time for a reset. I would say in these relations. Which are, sort of exhausted a little bit the momentum that has started in the 90s. So I will converge with my predecessor in saying that it's a sort of reset in the relations. But again, is Europe ready for a reset of its relation? What is the political commitment? What is the political capital that heads of states are ready to spend on these issues while you have many elections and divided internal fronts, recovery of COVID, etc. So I don't want to sound too gloomy, but there is these are challenging times, but again, it is in these times that we make progress, as history has shown. So, my recommendation, if I had one to do, is to multiply this kind of initiatives and dialogues, and with young leaders, with think tanks, universities, where we can produce and share common visions and have intense channels of discussions and dialogue that in the end may influence politics.
Thank you. Signor Massolo, we spoke about political integration, economic integration. Of course, there is a need for infrastructure for this integration, but are all of these investments in seaports, infrastructure in the Mediterranean, aren't already too much? Isn't there the risk of a white elephant, as was mentioned before? Isn't there the risk that everybody wants to be an international hub, but there is not enough traffic for everybody? Could it be that we are over-investing already, anticipating some integration? Please, Mr. Massolo.
Well, before answering, I also wanted to comment a little bit on the previous question raised by our representative of the young leaders. Actually, I would broadly agree with the two interventions I heard. I would add two things: one on the gloomier side, one on the brighter side. On the gloomier side is that, in fact, Europe is distracted. That is, we are very much concentrated on our domestic problems. We are engaged in bringing forward the next generation EU plan that requires a huge political, economic, financial I would even dare to say, moral effort from the side, from Europe's side. It was something that concentrated our attentions and will concentrate our attention for the future and midterm future as well. And all the leaderships in Europe know. Somebody was mentioning the elections, and this is very true. We vote a lot in Europe, actually, and voting means that governments tend to seek public approval and to look for support for the part of the public opinions, and this influences as well their goals and their perspectives. In a way, and on the gloomier side, we will need time. On the brighter side, I would, and this is what I was trying to say before, that is the idea that we need also private and enterprise and public opinion and civil society's role to enhance it. We all know Paracanna and his theory of functional geography, that is the geography of interconnectivity, of infrastructure, of links and bonds that connectivity develops, sometimes can be stronger than geopolitics, not always, but sometimes geopolitics or history or purely political calculations, because when you have a link, when you have a cooperation, for instance, in the energy sector, just to mention one of those, you are creating something that is very difficult for governments to bypass. And this is the role of public opinions, to be more demanding, to be less acquiescent, and to be satisfied with little, with too little delivery from the side of governments. On the other side, this is what companies broadening the links that exist among them can try to condition, can try to develop a network of interconnections that in a way or in another would oblige governments to act. I don't want to sound a little bit too idealistic here, but this is also a component that I wanted to stress the importance of. As far as overinvestment, well, there is a lot of money that is circulating in the world. We will see to what extent this huge liquidity that has been ignited into the global financial system in order to avoid to spare world economy from the worst effects of COVID, of the economic paralysis, of the lockdowns, etc., now, in a way or in another, will stay while the situation hopefully will improve, and I hope that this will be the case. There will be an issue here, how to sterilize, how to convey this kind of money into a competing, healthy, and legal, I would say, destination of investments. And here, infrastructures is something that is heavily investment consuming and work consuming, but we will have to be very careful in order to choose the destination of the investment according to the quality of investments. So I know that the temptation is there to disseminate, to do a little bit everything everywhere, but this is self-defeating, and governments, especially governments and international cooperation among governments and among financial and investment banks and financial institutions should aim at, trying to stimulate healthy investments, quality infrastructure, and infrastructures that would really fulfill its task of effective delivery of goods and services, and would be localized in parts of territory with backgrounds that would be suitable to, to develop the potentialities of this kind of investment. Of course, another dimension here is sustainability. Because
we'll make this our final question. We are going to the conclusion. If you could make it short.
Of course. Well, I'm just over. That is what I was trying to say. Is that enterprises have a role, and enterprises can build lasting links. And governments have to be very discerning in choosing investments and channeling money to productive and effective forms of investment, not to proliferate too many things in too many places without possibility of delivery of goods and services.
Thank you. Mr. Elainau, the same question to you, or are we building everywhere where it is necessary, or already doing too much? What's your opinion?
Well, the future will tell. I think, not well-established investments and unsustainable, financially unsustainable investments will collapse in the end. I think you can have some subsidies, but not endlessly. So, but I would say yes. This needs to be a bit more market-driven. That was my first comment when you asked me about China. When it is when you internalize all the risks, you have no more rational decision mechanism that is taking place. So we need to have firms, and in the end, this kind of investments are done by firms. But of course, since it's long term, there's a need for the state to play its role. So I don't think this is an issue. And there's also, of course, competition, healthy competition. Some of the countries on this side of the Mediterranean, where I'm sitting, are starting to compete with the European ports, which is, I think, healthy. And I would say optimal as an economist. So I don't see that is a big as a big issue in the region.
Thank you. So I will turn to Mr. Auxerre. The same question: are all those investments anticipating this integration, this economic development? Is it okay, or is it already too much? What do you think?
I prefer not to answer this question because I'm not an expert on it. But I would like to add something which can be an illustration of what has been said in terms of the gloomy, brightest aspect of this mix of economic and geopolitical questions, which are now completely interconnected. I would like to give the example of the gas in Eastern Mediterranean. At the same time, the East Mediterranean Gas Forum, which bring together actors with very, very different positions, such as Egypt, Israel, Palestine, Jordan, Greece, Cyprus for sure, and Italy and France. So that's a good aspect of it, which shows that countries can collectively try to optimize the gains and so cooperate. That's le doux commerce de Montesquieu, the rule of the sweet trade of Montesquieu. At the same time, Turkey policy, now associated with Libya since 2019, shows that it can create a confrontation situation. Which can be very very tense and create a lot of tensions. So the same issue, economical with strong economical consequences, it's very important for Europe, and you know there is a lot of money there and strategic issues, can, if it's well managed, be very positive. And but we have to take into account the fact that there are some geopolitical aspect in this issue, and which can have very strong confrontational linked. So it illustrates, in my view, very well this new world where everything is geopolitical and even economic and business.
So thank you very much for these final remarks, because we really know economics is important, but it's not just economics. There are many factors playing here. Thank you to all the participants in this panel.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for this highly interesting panel. Luca, you said economics is not all, so I would like to just open up the floor as well to the young change makers who made it here to Lugano. So is there any question from the public? Please.
Hello, everyone. Just one quick question and reflection. With the vision and the strategy built and they will come, the United Arab Emirates are the great example of collecting investment and capital from all around the world. With your experience and your knowledge, how likely other countries in the Middle East can replicate this model where economics is very solid and coexistence of different nationalities, religion, and as well politics exist and coexist in a single country? How you see a replication of this model in other countries? Thank you.
Signor Massolo?
In my humble opinion, it has to come from within. It is from individual southern shore countries. It would be a little bit tricky to speak about those things exactly while we are seeing such a major failure of what I would call the liberal interventionism, this blatant example of Afghanistan. So I would be very careful, to speak from this about this kind of things from a Western perspective. It's probably not the case. My point is, it has to come from within. It's something that has to be felt by public opinions, civil societies first and foremost. And my hope is centered and is concentrated on the younger generations.
Thank you so much. I think this is an amazing and beautiful future-oriented closure of this panel. So thank you so much for all the participants. Yes, there were some gloomy or pessimistic predictions, but also some bright ones. And I think that's what this platform is all about, to really, find a good balanced dialogue, to really talk about things, how they are. We heard a lot of interesting things about, responsibilities of governments, the role of the finance world and the, private-public corporations as well, to really give a new launch to all these, big infrastructure programs. So thank you so much.